They laughed because the hillside had no trees left, but the dog heard water moving under the roots before any man in Pine Hollow knew what the land was still keeping alive. Owen Maddox arrived at Clara Whitmore's law office on an October morning that smelled of wet leaves, coffee, and the first cold breath of the mountains. The town of Pine Hollow sat tucked in a narrow valley of eastern Tennessee, where the roads curved around ridges, church steeples rose above maple trees, and every stranger was noticed before he reached the second stop sign. Owen was 40 years old, a white veteran with broad shoulders, a weathered face, dark brown hair cut short but no longer kept with military sharpness, and a few silver threads showing near his temples. He wore a faded field jacket over a blue work shirt, worn jeans, and scuffed brown boots, the same practical clothes he wore almost everywhere because they asked nothing from the world and promised nothing back. Beside him stood Bishop, his 6-year-old German shepherd, black and tan, strong-chested, calm-eyed, with alert ears that seemed to turn toward sounds most people had forgotten how to hear. The office was small, above a pharmacy that still sold root beer in glass bottles, and Clara Whitmore had the careful posture of a woman who had spent 50 years reading the fine print of other people's endings. Her white hair was pinned behind one ear, her glasses hung on a chain, and her desk held a brass lamp, a stack of county files, and a sealed envelope with Owen's name written in blue ink. "Your great-uncle Miles Maddox left you a parcel on the North Ridge," she said, sliding the envelope toward him. 23 acres, more or less." Owen looked at the paper, then back at her. "I did not know I had a great-uncle." "He knew of you," Clara said softly. "That was enough for him." From the corner of the room, 2 men who had come to witness another signing exchanged looks. One of them, a heavy-set land broker in a quilted vest, gave a quiet laugh and did not quite hide it. "North Ridge?" he said. "That is the Stump Hill." Clara's eyes sharpened. "Mr. Bell, this is a private matter." The broker lifted both hands as if innocent. "I am only saying what everybody knows. Logging company stripped it 20 years ago. Nothing up there but dead stumps, bad soil, and rocks big enough to break an axle." The other man chuckled into his coffee. "Miles left him a graveyard for trees." Owen did not answer. He had spent enough of his life being measured by people who mistook silence for emptiness. He only opened the envelope. Inside were the deed, an old survey map, a key on a faded leather tag, and a single note written in a hand that pressed hard into the paper. "Do not count the trees they cut. Count what their roots were guarding." Bishop rose from where he had been sitting by the door. The German shepherd walked to Owen's chair, lowered his nose to the note, and breathed in slowly. Then his ears lifted. Not toward the office. Not toward the men laughing. Toward the window that faced the ridge beyond town. Clara noticed and went still. "Miles had a shepherd once," she said. "Said that dog could hear a spring through stone." The room quieted in a way that made the old radiator sound louder. Owen folded the note and placed it inside his jacket. "Where is the road?" he asked. The broker laughed again, but softer this time. "Road is generous. Mud track past the old mill, then up through briars. If you are smart, you will sell the claim to somebody who likes tax write-offs." Owen stood, broad shoulders filling the small space beside Clara's desk. Bishop stood with him at once, black and tan coat catching the brass lamp glow, his calm, intelligent eyes fixed on the window as if the hillside were calling through glass, wood, and weather. "I will look at it first," Owen said. Clara handed him the key. Her fingers paused against his palm for half a second. "Miles was not a foolish man," she said quietly. "People thought he was because he kept buying ruined land. But he believed the hill was not dead. He believed it was waiting for someone patient enough to listen." By noon, Owen's old pickup was climbing the North Ridge Road, tires grinding over wet gravel, Bishop upright in the passenger seat. Pine Hollow dropped behind them into a patchwork of roofs, smoke, and church bells. The road narrowed after the old sawmill, then turned to mud and stone, winding through brush where young pines had tried and failed to reclaim the slope. When Owen reached the gate, it hung open on one hinge. Beyond it, the hillside rose like a scar under the gray sky. Hundreds of stumps covered the slope, pale and cracked, their roots gripping the earth like old hands that refused to let go. No birds moved. No leaves whispered overhead. The place felt stripped of voice. Owen stepped out slowly, cold wind pressing against his faded field jacket. He looked across the useless inheritance everyone had laughed at, and for one moment, he almost believed them. Then Bishop jumped down from the truck and changed everything. The German shepherd did not wander. He did not sniff randomly or chase the scent of field mice through the weeds. He walked uphill in a slow, deliberate curve from one stump to the next, as if following a line drawn under the soil. Halfway up, he stopped before a blackened stump larger than the rest, its roots raised from the ground in a twisted circle. Bishop lowered his head, pressed one ear close to the earth, and became perfectly still. Owen held his breath. The wind faded. The hillside waited. Then Bishop lifted one paw and scratched the moss 3 times, calm and certain, while beneath Owen's boots, so faint he first thought it was memory, something in the dead hill seemed to hum. Owen stood halfway up the north ridge with one hand resting on the blackened stump and the other held open at his side, as if touching too much at once might break the strange quiet gathering around him. The hum beneath his boots was faint, almost shy, but it was there, a low vibration moving through root, soil, and stone. Bishop remained beside the stump, black and tan coat ruffled by the October wind, strong chest still, alert ears angled downward, calm intelligent eyes fixed on the ground as though he were listening to a voice buried far below. Owen knelt slowly. The moss beneath Bishop's paw was thick and dark, different from the dry gray patches scattered across the hillside. He pressed his palm flat against the earth. At first he felt only cold mud. Then, beneath it, a rhythm, not mechanical, not loud, but steady. Water, he thought. Or something like water moving where no water should have been. The hillside no longer felt dead. It felt covered, muted, waiting under a blanket of stumps and old judgment. He took the folding knife from his pocket and scraped moss from the side of the blackened stump. The bark flaked away in soft dark curls. Beneath it, carved into the old wood, was a small symbol, 3 curved lines rising from a circle, like a spring bubbling out of stone. Under the symbol were 2 initials, MM, cut deep and careful. Miles Maddox had been here. Not as a confused old man wandering ruined ground, but as someone marking a point on a map only he expected the right person to read. Bishop lowered his nose to the roots and began working at a narrow place where 2 thick roots split apart. He did not dig wildly. He scraped 3 times, paused, sniffed, then scraped again with the precision of a dog that knew the difference between soil and story. Owen joined him, using his gloved hands to pull away mud, wet leaves, and small stones. The smell of earth rose rich and cold. After a few inches, his fingers struck metal. He cleared the spot carefully until a small rectangular box appeared, wrapped in oilcloth, and wedged beneath the root like it had been placed there before the stump fully settled into rot. The box was not large, about the size of a lunch pail, but it felt heavy when he lifted it free. He carried it to a flat rock and unwrapped the cloth. The metal beneath was dark green, sealed tight, with the spring symbol scratched on the lid. For a long moment he only looked at it. The wind moved across the hillside, slipping through dead grass and cut roots with a dry whisper. Down in Pine Hollow, the town lay hidden behind the curve of the ridge, small and comfortable with what it thought it knew. Owen opened the latch. Inside was a brass key, an old hand-drawn map, and a folded note. The map showed the hillside not as it looked now, but as Miles must have understood it, dozens of stumps marked in a spiral, each one numbered, each one connected by thin blue lines that curved toward the blackened stump at the center. At the bottom, written in hard pencil, were the words, "The roots remember the water." Owen unfolded the note. Miles's handwriting matched the note from Clara's office, firm, slanted, and strangely alive. "Owen, if Bishop brought you here, then the hill has found the right listener. Do not let them convince you it is dead. The men who cut these trees saw only timber. They never asked why the oldest roots grew in a circle. Beneath this slope is the spring house my father showed me, and beneath that is the record of what Pine Hollow forgot to protect. The key opens more than wood. Follow the rain. Owen read the last sentence twice. Follow the rain. Above him, the clouds were thickening, their gray bellies pressed low over the ridge. The air had begun to smell metallic, the way it did before weather turned. Bishop lifted his head and looked toward the sky, then back to the line of stumps curving down the hill. Owen slipped the key and note into his jacket, and studied the map again. The spiral looked almost impossible until he raised his eyes and saw it in the land itself. The stumps were not scattered randomly. Some were darker, some taller, some half-buried, but together they formed a slow turning path around the hillside. It was not the logging pattern. It was older than that, shaped by the roots of trees that had grown around something underneath. A sound came from the road below, the crunch of tires on gravel. Owen turned. A white pickup with a lumber company decal slowed near the gate. The man from Clara's office, the broker in the quilted vest, leaned out the window and raised a hand. "You find buried treasure already?" he called, trying to make the words light. Owen closed the metal box and stood. Bishop moved beside him, not tense, not aggressive, simply present with quiet certainty. "Just looking at what I inherited," Owen said. The broker's eyes flicked to the box, then to the blackened stump. "Like I told you, that land is trouble. Stumps that size cost a fortune to clear. If you want, I can make some calls. Save you the headache." Owen looked across the hillside, at the gray earth, the dead roots, the spiral only just beginning to reveal itself. "I am not clearing anything yet." The broker's smile thinned. "Suit yourself. Weather comes fast up here." He drove on, but slower than he needed to. Owen watched the truck disappear around the bend. Bishop gave one soft breath and placed his paw on the map, directly over the center of the spiral. A drop of rain struck the paper. Then another. Soon thin lines of water began running down the hillside, slipping between stumps, circling roots, gathering in shallow grooves Owen had not noticed before. The rain was drawing the map onto the land in front of him. Owen folded the paper carefully, lifted the brass key in his palm, and followed Bishop uphill toward the blackened stump, where the dead hill had begun, very quietly, to speak. Rain changed the hillside faster than Owen expected. What had looked like a dead slope an hour earlier began to move in thin silver lines, each trickle sliding around roots and stumps with a quiet purpose that made the hand-drawn map feel less like a clue and more like a translation. Owen stood near the blackened stump with the brass key warm in his palm despite the cold, his faded field jacket darkening at the shoulders, blue work shirt damp at the collar, worn jeans streaked with mud, and scuffed brown boots planted in the softening ground. Bishop moved ahead of him through the rain, black and tan coat shining with water, strong chest steady, alert ears shifting from stump to stump, calm intelligent eyes following the path the hillside itself was revealing. The German shepherd stopped at each bend of the spiral, lowered his nose, listened, then moved on. He was not searching anymore. He was confirming. Owen followed the flow of rainwater as it curled past one pale stump, then another, gathering speed through shallow grooves hidden beneath weeds. Those grooves had not been made yesterday. They were worn into the earth by years of weather, guided by roots that had once belonged to trees old enough to understand the hill better than men with saws and survey stakes. Near the center of the spiral, just above the blackened stump, the water disappeared under a mat of moss and fallen leaves. Bishop stopped there, placed one paw on the moss, and looked back. Owen crouched, brushing rain from his face with one sleeve. The ground under his hand felt different, not soft mud, but boards beneath soil, old and firm. He used his pocket knife to cut away a net of small roots, then pulled handfuls of wet moss aside. A wooden edge appeared. Oak dark with age, fitted so cleanly into the earth that it had become part of the hill. Bishop gave 3 quiet taps with his paw. Owen cleared faster now, careful but sure, until a square outline showed beneath the moss. At one corner was an iron ring, rusted but intact, tucked beneath a root as thick as a man's wrist. The brass key did not fit anything there, but when Owen slipped his fingers through the ring and pulled, the whole square shifted a fraction of an inch. A breath of cold air rose from beneath it, carrying the scent of stone, old wood, and fresh water. Owen paused. The rain tapped on the stumps around him like 100 small clocks. Far below, Pine Hollow lay hidden behind mist, unaware that the hill it had dismissed was opening its mouth. He pulled again, using both hands. The hatch lifted with a low wooden groan, heavy with years of soil pressing down. Beneath it, stone steps descended into darkness, their edges wet but solid, disappearing under the hillside. Bishop stood at the opening, ears forward, body still, eyes bright. Owen took the flashlight from his jacket pocket and aimed it down. The beam caught stone walls, a narrow channel of clear water, and something carved into the first step, the same spring symbol from the stump. Beneath it were the initials MM. Miles had not hidden the entrance from Owen. He had hidden it from impatience. Owen glanced toward the road. No truck waited at the gate now, but the broker's slow smile lingered in his mind. So did Clara's warning that Miles had not been foolish. Owen pulled the hatch wider, propped it with a fallen branch, and spoke softly to Bishop. Easy. We look. We do not disturb more than we need to. The German shepherd stepped down first. His paws made no sound on the stone. Owen followed, bending slightly under the low ceiling, one hand on the damp wall. The air changed immediately. Above, the rain smelled of leaves and mud. Below, it smelled clean and cold, like water drawn from a deep well. The steps led into a small stone chamber built directly into the hillside. It was no natural cave. The walls had been carefully stacked by hand, fitted without much mortar, and still holding after decades. Along the floor ran a narrow channel where spring water flowed clear over smooth stones, disappearing through an opening toward the valley. On the left wall, old shelves held glass jars filled with seeds, each labeled in faded ink: white oak, tulip poplar, black walnut, mountain laurel. On the right wall hung rolled maps and metal tubes. A wooden table stood at the center, and on it rested a lantern, a waterproof ledger, and a second note sealed inside a glass jar. Owen shined the light over the room, and something in his chest loosened with a tenderness he had not expected. This was not a treasure room in the ordinary sense. It was a room built by someone who believed the future could still grow. Bishop walked to the water channel and lowered his nose, then drank once, slow and calm. The sound of his tongue touching the spring echoed softly against the stone. Owen opened the glass jar and removed the note. Miles's handwriting waited there, dry and clear. If you found the spring house, then you listened longer than the town did. This water fed Pine Hollow before the road, before the sawmill, before men learned to call land worthless when it stopped making them money. Do not sell the hill until you read the records. The valley drinks from what is hidden here. Owen looked up from the note to the thin stream running at his feet. The water was not much to look at. No roaring underground river. No dramatic waterfall. Just a steady, quiet flow through stone. But steady things had saved more lives than dramatic ones. He opened the ledger. The first pages held dates, water levels, rainfall notes, repairs, and sketches of root systems. Later pages included names of families, farms, wells, and drought years when the spring had kept livestock alive and kitchen taps running. Miles had recorded it all, not with pride, but with devotion. Bishop suddenly lifted his head toward the ceiling. Above them, faint through soil and timber, came the crunch of tires on wet gravel. Owen closed the ledger gently. A vehicle had returned to the gate. Owen did not move for several seconds. The ledger rested open in his hands, its pages filled with Miles Maddox's steady records of rainfall, spring flow, repairs, and names of families who had depended on the hidden water without ever knowing who protected it. Above the stone ceiling, the faint sound of tires on wet gravel stopped near the gate. Bishop stood beside the narrow channel, black and tan coat damp from rain and cave mist, strong chest lifted, alert ears fixed upward, calm intelligent eyes no longer resting on the water but on the world above. Owen closed the ledger carefully and placed it back on the table exactly where he had found it. The spring house seemed to grow quieter around him, though the water still moved in its clear channel with patient certainty. He took one metal map tube from the shelf, only long enough to see the label, North Ridge Water Rights, original survey copies. Then he returned it and memorized its place. This was not something to carry out alone in the rain while a broker waited above with too much interest in his smile. He tucked Miles's note into the inside pocket of his faded field jacket, lifted the flashlight, and touched Bishop lightly between the shoulders. "We go up slow," he said. The German shepherd climbed first, paws silent on the stone steps. Owen followed, broad shoulders brushing the low entrance, blue work shirt cool against his back, worn jeans muddy at the knees, scuffed brown boots finding each step by feel. As they neared the hatch, the sound of voices came through the rain. One belonged to the broker from Clara's office, Mr. Bell. The other was unfamiliar, younger, carrying the bright confidence of someone who had not yet learned that land remembers more than paperwork. "He is probably just walking it," the younger voice said. "Nothing up here but Stumps," Mr. Bell answered, lower but still clear enough through the open hatch. "That is what I told him." But Miles was secretive. "If the old man hid anything useful, I would rather know before Clara starts making calls." Owen stopped one step below the opening. Bishop looked back at him, perfectly still. Rain dripped from the raised hatch in slow beads. Owen could have waited in the dark until they left, but hiding on land legally placed in his hands felt wrong. He climbed out into the gray afternoon. Mr. Bell stood 20 feet away near the blackened stump, his quilted vest beaded with rain, a phone in one hand. Beside him was a younger man in a clean work jacket with a development company logo stitched above the pocket. Both men turned when Owen appeared from the ground with Bishop at his side. For one brief moment, their faces told the truth before their mouths rearranged it. Surprise first. Then calculation. Then politeness. "Well," Mr. Bell said, forcing a laugh, "looks like you found one of Miles's old root cellars." Owen pulled the hatch partly closed behind him, not enough to hide it, enough to protect the opening from rain. "Looks like it." The younger man stepped forward, looking past Owen toward the stone steps. Bishop moved half a pace and stood between them. The German shepherd did not growl, did not bare his teeth, did nothing but hold the space with calm certainty. The younger man stopped. "I am Grant Bellamy," he said. "Pine Ridge Development. We are looking at access options on the north side. Mr. Bell mentioned you might be open to selling." "He mentioned wrong," Owen said. Mr. Bell's smile tightened. "Now, Owen, you have not had time to understand what you own. Clearing this slope alone would drain your pockets. Stump removal, erosion control, road access, liability. A fair offer might save you years of headache." Owen looked across the hillside. Rainwater continued tracing the spiral between the stumps, disappearing into grooves that led back toward the spring house. The slope did not look pretty. It looked wounded, stubborn, and alive beneath the wound. He understood that feeling better than he wanted to admit. "I am not making decisions today." Grant Bellamy glanced at the hatch again. "At least let us inspect the structure. If there are underground voids, the county will want to know. Safety concerns." The word safety came too easily. Owen had heard men use practical words to cover hungry intentions before. He had done enough repair work, enough odd jobs after leaving the service, to know when someone looked at land and saw only the fastest way through it. "Clara Whitmore can decide who reviews the records," Owen said. "I will be calling her." At Clara's name, Mr. Bell's expression changed. "Not much, but enough." "Of course. Clara is thorough." Bishop turned suddenly toward the lower part of the spiral path. His ears lifted, then tilted toward the ground. Rain ran between his paws and curled around a pale stump 10 yards away. The water there was pooling oddly, circling the stump instead of running past it. Owen noticed a second symbol carved near its base, half hidden by mud, not the spring mark this time, but a small square with a line beneath it. A marker. Miles had left more than one. Mr. Bell noticed Owen noticing. "Weather is getting worse," he said quickly. "No point standing out here." Owen did not answer. He walked to the pale stump with Bishop beside him. The two men stayed where they were, but their attention followed every step. Owen knelt and brushed away wet soil. Beneath the square symbol, small letters were carved into the old wood archive. His pulse slowed, deepened. The spring house was only the beginning. The water records were somewhere else, maybe deeper, maybe safer. Bishop placed one paw beside the symbol and gave 3 quiet taps. The rain softened around them, turning the hillside into a hush of water and old roots. Owen stood, mud on his hands, Miles's note against his chest, the brass key heavy in his pocket. "Gentlemen," he said, looking back at the broker and the developer, "you should head down before the road gets worse." Mr. Bell opened his mouth as if to object, then thought better of it. Grant Bellamy gave a stiff nod. They walked to their truck, but neither looked relieved. When their taillights finally disappeared into the mist below, Owen remained beside the pale stump. Bishop leaned against his leg, warm and steady despite the rain. The hillside had shown him water. Now it was showing him memory. And somewhere beneath the stumps everyone had mocked, Miles Maddox had hidden the proof that this dead hill might still be the heart of the whole valley. Owen waited until the sound of the truck dissolved completely into the rain before he moved again. The hillside felt different without the men watching it. Not safer exactly, but more willing to speak. Water slipped down the slope in thin shining lines, curling around the pale stump-marked archive and running beneath a shelf of roots that had knitted themselves into the soil like old fingers holding a secret closed. Bishop stood beside Owen, black and tan coat darkened by the weather, strong chest steady, alert ears turning with every soft rush of water under the ground, calm intelligent eyes fixed on the stump as if the word carved there had meaning beyond letters. Owen crouched and wiped more mud from the symbol. The small square with a line beneath it had been cut deep, then hidden by years of moss and weather. He looked at the brass key in his palm, then at the stump, then at the rain tracing the spiral from above. Miles's words returned to him, "Follow the rain." He did. The water pooling around the pale stump did not sink straight into the soil. It slid toward a narrow crease in the hillside, almost invisible beneath dead grass. Owen pulled away clumps of weeds, and Bishop nosed aside a mat of wet leaves. Beneath them lay a flat strip of stone, then another, each one fitted like steps but covered so carefully by earth that no passerby would have noticed. The stone path did not go down like the hatch to the spring house. It curved sideways across the slope, following the contour of the hill toward a cluster of 3 stumps standing in a tight triangle. Owen's faded field jacket clung damply to his shoulders, his blue work shirt chilled at the collar, his worn jeans streaked with clay, but he barely felt the cold. There are moments when a man who has spent years drifting suddenly senses a pattern under his feet, and the body forgets discomfort because the heart is too busy listening. At the triangle of stumps, Bishop stopped. He lowered his head between them and breathed slowly. Then he stepped back and looked at Owen. No bark. No digging. Just certainty. Owen cleared the center with his hands until his fingers found a round iron plate no wider than a dinner dish. Around its edge were the words North Ridge Archive, Maddox Spring Records. The brass key fit into a small covered slot at the center. When he turned it, the plate loosened with a quiet click, and a section of the hillside opened not upward, but outward. A narrow stone door, disguised as part of the slope, swung inward on hidden pins. Cool air flowed out, carrying the scent of cedar, ink, and limestone. Owen took a slow breath. This was the kind of work done by a patient man who expected greedy men to look quickly and kind men to look twice. Bishop entered first, paused careful on the stone threshold. Owen followed with his flashlight, ducking under the low lintel. The passage beyond was shorter than the first, and drier. Its walls were lined with cedar planks, and at the end stood a small archive chamber no larger than a garden shed. But what it held made Owen stop in the doorway. Metal drawers filled one wall. Glass front cabinets filled another. On shelves were jars of seeds, bundles of letters tied in twine, water-testing notebooks, land deeds, and old photographs of Pine Hollow before the ridge had been cut. The town in those photographs looked greener, softer, shaded by great trees whose roots must have reached deep into the hidden spring veins. At the center of the room sat a table with a waterproof case and a folded canvas cover. Owen opened the case. Inside were the original water rights, old county surveys, letters from farmers during dry summers, and a ledger labeled Valley Relief Years. He read names, dates, and amounts of water delivered from the North Ridge spring to wells, barns, kitchens, and church basements when drought had lowered every creek in sight. People had written to Miles with thanks. Some paid him in cash. Some paid in cornmeal, fence repair, jars of peaches, or simply promises to help someone else when their turn came. The hidden value of the hill was not only the spring. It was the record of a community being quietly kept alive by something no one respected enough to protect. Bishop walked to a lower shelf and nudged a leather tube with his nose. Owen unfastened it and drew out a large map. The spring lines beneath Pine Hollow spread across the paper in blue ink, branching under the valley like veins beneath skin. One thick line ran directly below the proposed access route Clara had mentioned, the road a developer wanted to carve through the Stump hillside. If heavy equipment broke that line, the spring house could collapse, wells could fail, and the valley might not understand what it had lost until the taps ran dry. Owen folded the map with care, his jaw set but his expression calm. Anger rose in him, but it did not rule him. The army had taught him urgency. Life afterward had taught him restraint. This needed witnesses, paperwork, and the kind of truth that could stand in daylight. He gathered only what he needed: the water rights copy, the spring map, Miles's ledger, and a letter sealed in an envelope addressed to Owen, when the hill finally hums. He did not open it yet. Some words deserved a dry room and a steady heart. When he emerged from the archive, the rain had softened to mist. Bishop came out beside him and shook water from his coat, then looked down toward Pine Hollow where evening lights had begun to appear one by one. Owen stood among the stumps, holding the records against his chest beneath his jacket. The hill no longer looked ugly to him. It looked scarred, yes, and stripped, and tired from years of being misunderstood. But beneath it moved water, memory, seeds, and proof. He looked at the blackened stump, then the pale one, then the spiral vanishing into fog. "You are not dead," he said softly to the hillside. Bishop leaned against his leg, warm and steady. Far below, the town lights flickered through mist, unaware that its future had been waiting under roots. Owen drove back down from the North Ridge with the records tucked inside his faded field jacket, and Bishop sitting upright beside him, the German shepherd's black and tan coat still damp from the rain, his strong chest steady, alert ears shifting toward every sound beyond the wet windows. The old pickup rolled slowly over gravel, mud, and fallen leaves, its headlights catching the silver threads of water running across the road. Pine Hollow appeared below them in the valley, warm with porch lights and diner signs, unaware that its hidden spring lines had just been traced under a hill everyone called useless. Owen did not go to the motel. He did not stop for supper. He drove straight to Clara Whitmore's office above the pharmacy, where one yellow lamp still glowed behind the second-floor window. Clara opened the door before he finished knocking, as if she had been expecting the hill to send him back before dark. She took one look at his mud-streaked jeans, his scuffed brown boots, the wet edge of the documents under his arm, and Bishop standing calmly at his side, then stepped aside without a word. Her office smelled of paper, raincoats, old wood, and the faint sweetness of root beer from the closed pharmacy below. Owen laid the water rights copy, the spring map, Miles's ledger, and the sealed letter on her desk. Clara did not touch them right away. She stood over them with both hands resting on the chair back, white hair pinned neatly despite the late hour, eyes narrowed not in suspicion but in recognition. "So he was right," she said. "Miles was right about all of it." Owen looked at the blue lines branching beneath Pine Hollow on the map. "There is a spring house under the ridge. And an archive. 2 of them, maybe more. The proposed access route crosses one of the main lines." Clara sat slowly. "Grant Bellamy's project. He came up there with Mr. Bell." Clara's mouth tightened. "Of course he did." She put on her glasses and began reading. The room grew quiet except for rain tapping the window and Bishop's steady breathing near the door. Page by page, Clara's expression changed from caution to grief to something like awe. The old water rights had been recorded properly. The surveys were signed. The spring lines matched county references no one had pulled in years. Miles had not been chasing a theory. He had been preserving evidence. When Clara opened the ledger, her fingers paused over the names of families helped during dry summers. She recognized some of them. "My father's farm," she whispered. 1978. "I remember the well going low. My mother said a neighbor helped us." She never said who? Owen thought of the jars of seeds, the thank you letters, the hidden channels of water moving beneath roots and roads. Miles did not want credit. "No," Clara said softly. "He wanted the valley to survive long enough to remember what mattered." She reached for the sealed envelope addressed to Owen, but stopped before opening it. "This is yours." Owen took it, and for a moment he hesitated. The letter had waited underground, sealed against damp and time, meant for a man Miles barely knew and somehow trusted. Bishop rose and came to stand beside the chair, pressing his shoulder lightly against Owen's leg. Owen broke the seal. Miles's handwriting filled the page, firm and dark. "Owen, if you are reading this, then the hill has hummed under your hand and Bishop has brought you farther than pride would have let most men go. I know they called the land ruined. I know they may have called you the same in ways polite people disguise. Do not believe either one. A stump is not proof that life ended. Sometimes it is proof that roots held on when everything visible was taken. The spring beneath North Ridge kept Pine Hollow alive more than once. The records will protect it if you have the patience to bring them into the light. But protection is only the first duty. Restoration is the second. Plant what was cut. Guard what was hidden. Give the hill a purpose again, and it may give you one too." Owen lowered the letter. Clara said nothing. The office lamp hummed softly above the desk, and outside cars hissed along the wet street below. For years Owen had mistaken purpose for orders, work for duty, silence for strength. Miles's letter offered something different, a task that did not require him to prove his worth before beginning. It simply asked him to listen, then act with care. Clara leaned back and removed her glasses. "We need to file an emergency notice with the county first thing in the morning. Water rights, protected spring access, preservation of historical records. I will call the county clerk, the watershed board, and old Harold Tate. He surveyed half the valley before these new mapping programs existed." "And the developer?" Owen asked. "He can wait outside the line of the law like everyone else." There was no drama in her voice, only certainty sharpened by decades of paperwork. Bishop gave a soft breath, then returned to the door and looked down the dark stairwell. Owen followed his gaze. Someone had entered the pharmacy below, though the shop was closed. Clara heard it too. Footsteps, then a knock at the office door, quick and nervous. Clara opened it to find a young woman from the pharmacy holding a folded message. "Mr. Bell left this downstairs," she said. "He said it was urgent." Clara unfolded the paper and read aloud only the first line: "Formal purchase offer for North Ridge parcel, cash, immediate closing." She looked at Owen. "They are moving fast." Owen took the offer, read the number, and felt nothing like temptation. It was more money than he had ever seen offered to him at once. Enough to buy comfort. Enough to leave. Enough to do what men like Mr. Bell expected him to do. He folded the paper once and set it beside Miles's letter. "No," he said. Clara's eyes softened. "You are sure?" Owen looked down at Bishop, then at the spring map, the blue lines beneath the valley, the names in the ledger, the sentence about roots holding on. "I have been handed enough things people thought were worthless," he said. "I know better now." Outside, the rain began to ease. Somewhere beneath the North Ridge, unseen in the dark, the spring kept moving through stone, steady as mercy, waiting for morning. Morning came to Pine Hollow washed clean and pale, with rainwater still dripping from the pharmacy awning and mist lifting from the valley in slow white folds. Owen had slept little in the small motel room above the old hardware store, not because the bed was poor, but because Miles's words kept moving through him like the spring beneath the ridge. Plant what was cut. Guard what was hidden. Give the hill a purpose again. By 7 o'clock, he was back in Clara Whitmore's office, wearing the same faded field jacket over his blue work shirt, worn jeans still marked with yesterday's clay, and scuffed brown boots darkened at the soles. Bishop stood beside him, black and tan coat brushed dry now, strong chest steady, alert ears raised, calm intelligent eyes watching the staircase as if he knew the day would test more than documents. Clara had already made coffee, stacked copies of the water rights, and placed Miles's ledger in a clear archival sleeve. By 8, Harold Tate arrived, a retired county surveyor in his 70s with a canvas field bag, a yellow raincoat, and hands that shook until they touched a map. He spread the old surveys across Clara's desk and leaned close, his gray eyebrows lifting with every line. "I remember these markers," he said. "North Ridge used to feed half the shallow wells in the lower valley before the new lines went in. Folks forgot because forgetting is easier than gratitude." Clara filed the emergency notice at the courthouse before noon. She walked there with Owen, Bishop, Harold, and the documents in a waterproof case. People on the square noticed. Mr. Bell noticed too, standing outside the diner with Grant Bellamy and 2 men in clean jackets who looked more comfortable around conference tables than mud. They watched Owen cross the street, and for once, nobody laughed. The county clerk, a narrow woman named Patrice Rowland, reviewed the filing with the careful frown of someone who did not enjoy being hurried by anyone. Clara gave her the water rights, the original survey references, the spring map, and the preservation claim. Harold confirmed the marker language from memory, then from his own old field notebook, which he had kept in a shoebox for 20 years because, as he said, "A line on land is still a promise if a man drew it honest." Patrice stamped the first page. The sound was small, but to Owen it landed like a gate closing between the hill and those who wanted to cut through it blindly. By early afternoon, they drove back to the North Ridge together. 2 county vehicles followed, along with Harold's old truck and Clara's sedan. The hillside looked different in daylight after the storm. Hundreds of stumps still covered the slope, pale, cracked, and ugly to anyone who did not know how to look. But Owen saw the spiral now. He saw how the rain channels curved. He saw where the roots guarded the hatch, where the pale stump marked the archive, where the spring house breathed cold air beneath the moss. Bishop walked ahead of the group with the quiet authority of a guide, stopping at each important stump before anyone asked. Harold knelt near the blackened center stump, ran his fingers over the spring symbol, and let out a long breath. "Miles, you stubborn old cedar post," he murmured. "You were right." Grant Bellamy arrived halfway through the inspection with Mr. Bell behind him, both trying to appear cooperative. Clara did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She showed them the stamped emergency notice, the water rights filing, and the protected historical record claim. Grant read each page with a face that grew less certain by the line. "We were operating from current county maps," he said. Harold tapped his cane against the ground. "Current does not always mean complete." Bishop stood beside Owen, ears forward, watching the men without hostility. Owen felt no triumph, only a sober kind of relief. He had not wanted to beat anyone. He had wanted the hill to be heard before it was harmed by paperwork too shallow to see roots. The county inspector descended into the spring house with Owen, Clara, and Harold. They photographed the channel, the seed jars, the ledgers, the maps, and the stonework. The inspector, a younger man named Luis Moreno, crouched by the flowing water and dipped a testing vial into the stream. "Clear flow," he said. "Steady temperature. This is not surface runoff." Harold smiled like a grandfather watching a child finally understand a family story. In the archive chamber, Clara catalogued the first set of documents, while Owen opened the envelope of additional notes Miles had left inside the ledger. One page held a rough drawing of a future hillside, native saplings planted between old stumps, a small cabin near the spring house entrance, a walking trail shaped around the spiral, and a sign that read North Ridge Restoration Ground. Beneath it Miles had written, "Let veterans plant trees here." Let service dogs walk the water line. Let people who feel cut down learn what roots can still do. Owen stared at the sentence for a long time. Bishop pressed his shoulder against Owen's leg, warm and solid in the cool stone room. Clara saw the drawing and smiled softly. That sounds like him. He never saved anything only to lock it away. Outside, as evening approached, the developer's men left without argument. Mr. Bell lingered by his truck, looking up at the slope as if seeing for the first time something besides cost. I did not know, he said when Owen passed. Owen looked at him. The easy answer would have been to say that not knowing was no excuse. But the hillside had taught him something about what remained hidden until someone took time to listen. Now you do, he said. Mr. Bell lowered his eyes and drove away. When the last county vehicle disappeared down the ridge road, Owen remained near the blackened stump with Bishop. Survey flags fluttered around them, bright orange against gray wood and wet earth. The hill was still scarred. Still rough. Still far from beautiful in the way postcards understood beauty. But beneath it water moved. In its hidden rooms, records waited in order. In its stumps, markers pointed toward a future Miles had drawn before Owen ever arrived. The sun broke through a low cloud and touched the rain on the roots until every stump seemed rimmed with light. Owen placed one hand on Bishop's head and the other on the blackened wood. For the first time since inheriting the hill, he did not wonder what Miles had left him. He wondered who might one day be healed by what they planted there. By the second week after the county filing, Pine Hollow had begun to speak of the North Ridge differently. The old jokes about Stump Hill faded from diner booths and hardware store aisles, replaced by lower voices, slower questions, and the kind of humility that arrives when a town learns it has been drinking from something it once mocked. Owen moved through those days with steady purpose, still wearing his faded field jacket over a blue work shirt, worn jeans, and scuffed brown boots, his broad shoulders carrying lumber, seed trays, rolled maps, and more responsibility than he had expected to receive from a dead man he had barely known. Bishop stayed close through all of it, the 6-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat, strong chest, alert ears, and calm intelligent eyes, walking the spiral path each morning before anyone else arrived, stopping at the blackened stump, the pale archive stump, and the spring house hatch as if making sure the hill still remembered its own language. Clara Whitmore filed the final preservation documents with the county and helped Owen establish the North Ridge Restoration Trust, using Miles's records, the water rights, and the protected spring claim as its backbone. Harold Tate returned with a group of retired surveyors who treated the old maps like sacred music, correcting lines that had been carelessly redrawn over the years. Luis Moreno from the Watershed Board installed small monitoring gauges in the spring channel, and when he showed Owen the first readings, his voice carried quiet respect. Steady flow, he said. Old, clean, and more important than anyone guessed. Owen thought of Miles kneeling in the same chamber, taking notes by lantern light, while the town above called him odd, stubborn, or foolish. Sometimes a man was not strange. Sometimes he was simply early. The first planting day came on a Saturday washed in clear blue light. Trucks rolled up the ridge road carrying saplings, shovels, straw bales, water jugs, and volunteers who did not quite know where to stand at first. Some had laughed about the inheritance when Owen arrived. Some had repeated what they had heard without knowing better. Now they came with work gloves and cautious apologies folded into their silence. Owen did not make speeches. He only opened the gate. Bishop stood beside him, tail low, ears high, greeting each arrival with the calm dignity of a dog who judged people not by what they had said before, but by whether they were willing to help now. Clara came with coffee. June from the diner brought biscuits wrapped in towels. Harold brought a box of hand-painted wooden stakes marked with native tree names: white oak, tulip poplar, red maple, black walnut, shortleaf pine. Owen placed the first sapling near the blackened stump. The young white oak was barely 4 feet tall, its roots wrapped in damp burlap, its branches thin enough to tremble in the breeze. He dug slowly, careful not to disturb the hidden water line below. Bishop watched from the edge of the hole, nose lifted toward the soil. When Owen set the sapling in place, the hill seemed quiet in a different way, not waiting now, but receiving. One by one, people spread across the slope. Children carried mulch in small buckets. Old farmers showed younger volunteers how to loosen clay without damaging roots. A church group planted mountain laurel near the lower path. 2 veterans from the county outreach office arrived in a pickup with a service dog in training, a golden retriever who followed Bishop with immediate respect. The men did not say much. They did not need to. They worked along the spiral, placing saplings between the stumps instead of removing them, letting the old cutwood remain as markers, witnesses, and reminders. By noon, the hillside looked less like a graveyard and more like a promise under construction. Near the spring house hatch, Owen found Mr. Bell standing alone with a shovel in his hand. The broker looked older without his easy smile. "Clara said you needed help planting along the lower channel," he said. Owen studied him for a moment, then nodded toward a row of black walnut saplings. "They go 10 feet apart." Mr. Bell nodded back and got to work. Forgiveness did not always arrive as an embrace. Sometimes it arrived as a man being allowed to plant what he once tried to price. In the afternoon, Clara gathered the volunteers near the archive stump while Harold explained the spring system, the old water rights, and why the hill needed protection. He spoke plainly, in the language of rain, roots, wells, and patience. The children listened better than some adults. When he finished, June asked Owen to say something. He looked at the rows of saplings, the wet dark soil, the stumps glowing pale in the sun, and Bishop sitting beside him with steady eyes. Words came slowly. "Miles left records," he said. "But he also left a question. What do we do with land after it has been hurt? I think the answer is the same as with people. You do not throw it away because the visible part was cut down. You look for what is still living underneath." No one clapped at first. The quiet was better. It settled over the hillside with the smell of fresh soil and coffee, and Owen knew the words had gone where they needed to go. As evening came, the volunteers drifted home, leaving behind rows of small trees flagged in orange and blue ribbon. Owen walked the spiral path with Bishop one last time. The spring house below hummed softly through the ground, no longer a secret but still sacred. At the top of the ridge, he looked down at Pine Hollow, its windows brightening one by one in the valley. He imagined the saplings grown tall years from now, their roots holding water, their branches making shade for people not yet born. Bishop leaned against his leg, warm and steady. The hill had not changed everything in a day. Healing rarely did. But the first roots were in the ground, and sometimes that was how miracles began. By late summer, the North Ridge no longer looked like the place Owen had first climbed in the rain. The stumps were still there, pale and cracked beneath the sun, but they no longer felt like endings. They stood among rows of young trees as markers of what had been taken and what had chosen to return. White oak leaves trembled in the warm wind. Tulip poplar saplings reached taller than Owen's shoulder. Black walnut trees held their dark green promise close to the soil. Wild flowers had begun appearing along the spiral path, small yellow and purple faces turning toward the light where the land had once seemed too tired to bloom. Owen walked that path each morning before town stirred, a white veteran with broad shoulders, a weathered face, dark brown hair cut short but no longer kept with military sharpness, and a few silver threads near his temples, wearing his faded field jacket over a blue work shirt, worn jeans, and scuffed brown boots. Bishop walked beside him, the 6-year-old German shepherd with a black and tan coat, strong chest, alert ears, and calm intelligent eyes, stopping at the spring house hatch as faithfully as prayer. The spring still moved beneath them, steady and cool, its quiet flow monitored now by the watershed board but still mysterious enough to feel like grace. Near the lower bend of the spiral, the small cabin Miles had drawn in his notes was finally standing. It was simple, built of cedar and local stone, with a front porch facing the valley and a wide room where people could warm themselves after working outside. Clara had insisted the trust documents be framed near the door, not to impress anyone, but to remind everyone that protection was also a form of love. June stocked the kitchen with coffee, soup, and biscuits whenever she claimed she had made too much at the diner. Harold Tate hung the old survey map on the wall, carefully leveled, then pretended dust had gotten in his eyes. Owen named the place North Ridge Rest Cabin, though the town soon called it Bishop's Hill because the dogs seemed to know every route, path, and visitor before they announced themselves. The first group came from the County Veterans Outreach Office in September, 4 men, 1 woman, 2 service dogs, and a counselor who understood that healing did not always begin with talking. They planted late-season shrubs, cleared invasive vines, spread mulch around the young trees, and sat in the shade when words became too heavy. Owen did not ask for stories. He offered water, tools, quiet, and work that mattered without demanding explanations. One man stood beside a stump for nearly an hour before kneeling to place soil around a sapling. When he finished, he rested one hand on the cutwood and whispered something no one else needed to hear. Bishop walked over and sat beside him until the man stood again. That was how the hill taught. Not loudly. Not quickly. With roots, patience, and the dignity of being useful. Over the next months, schoolchildren came to learn about water lines and native trees. Farmers came to thank Miles Maddox though he was gone. People who once called the land worthless brought fence posts, seed, gravel, and old photographs of the ridge before the logging company stripped it bare. Mr. Bell came twice a week with a shovel and never mentioned purchase offers again. One afternoon, he handed Owen a folder of old timber receipts he had found in his files and said, "These belong with the archive." Owen took them without ceremony, but later he placed them beside the water rights records, because even mistakes deserved to be remembered honestly if a community wanted to grow straight. The archive chamber remained cool and clean beneath the hill. The seed jars were catalogued. Miles's ledger was preserved. The letters from drought years were copied and placed in binders for visitors to read. On the wall near the entrance, Owen hung Miles's note. A stump is not proof that life ended. Sometimes it is proof that roots held on when everything visible was taken. People paused there often. Some read it and nodded. Some read it and cried quietly. Owen understood both. On the anniversary of his first climb up the ridge, he rose before dawn and walked to the blackened stump with Bishop. Fog rested low over Pine Hollow, turning rooftops and church steeples into soft shapes below. The saplings stood around him in rows and clusters, still young, still vulnerable, but alive. The old spring hummed faintly underfoot, the same sound Bishop had heard before anyone believed there was anything worth hearing. Owen knelt and placed his palm against the stump. The wood was rough, cool, and steady. For much of his life, he had thought healing meant becoming untouched by what had happened. The hill had taught him otherwise. Healing was not the erasing of scars. It was the decision to let roots grow around them. Bishop pressed his shoulder against Owen's arm, warm and faithful in the morning chill. Down at the cabin, a porch light flickered on. Someone was making coffee. Soon the day would fill with footsteps, shovels, dogs, laughter, and the quiet labor of people learning they were not finished. Owen looked across the hillside Miles had saved, the hillside people had mocked, the hillside that had given back water, memory, and purpose. He had inherited stumps, yes. But beneath them had been a spring. Around them had been a map. Through them had come a calling. As the first sunlight touched the young leaves, Owen stood with Bishop beside him and understood that kindness often returns through the very places the world gives up on. Sometimes a dead hill is not dead at all. Sometimes it is only waiting for one patient heart, and one faithful dog, to hear the life still moving underneath.